In August of 2023, India made history by purchasing 1 million barrels of crude oil from the United Arab Emirates. What made the purchase so special? It was done using the Indian rupee instead of the US dollar, a move that is now being replicated by many other countries around the world. But once again, what made this moment so special? Well, you may not realize it, but over 90% of foreign exchange transactions are done using the US dollar. It completely dominates global trade and has done so since it became the global reserve currency back before the end of World War II in 1945. And this worldwide dominance has allowed the US dollar to flourish while remaining stable, even during the most turbulent of times. But all of that is about to change. And here's why. It's important to first realize that the US dollar wasn't always the staple of foreign transactions. In fact, up until the 1940s, the US dollar was just like any other dollar in the world. It helped us live, but the nuances of it didn't really make a lot of sense. Everything changed, however, when the world shifted from the gold standard to using the US dollar as the global reserve currency. Now, the gold standard is tricky, so let me explain it using a game of Monopoly. Monopoly is just a game. But suppose all the paper money we know and love was backed by real gold coins. This means that at the end of the game, you would be able to transfer your winnings to real money, which could then be used in the real world. The game would control the amount of money in circulation to match the amount of gold. Otherwise, some players wouldn't be able to exchange their paper money for gold coins. This method means there is a sense of stability and trust in the system, as it means players can't just print money or introduce more money into circulation without real value to back it up. Similarly, before the 1940s, the world's gold standard operated in the same way. Each unit of currency in the world, such as the US dollar, the British pound sterling, and the Japanese yen, was directly tied and backed by a specific amount of gold. And this meant that a country's ability to print unlimited amounts of currency was regulated, helping to stabilize the global economy and global trade. However, the problem with the gold standard was that during times of economic crisis, it would limit a country's ability to adapt and introduce new money into circulation to help its citizens. And it was because of this, among many other reasons, that countries around the world began to abolish the gold standard in the early 1900s. The problems with the gold standard were only made worse by World War I and the Great Depression, which resulted in the United Kingdom leaving the gold standard in 1931. World War II also brought a great deal of strife and instability, leading even more countries to leave. However, this left global trade without a concrete reserve to prevent countries from taking advantage of one another with currency manipulation tactics. That's why, in 1944, the world was introduced to what is now regarded as the gold exchange standard through the Bretton Woods Agreement. The agreement resulted in 44 countries backing their currency with the US dollar, which at the time was still backed by gold. And this system was an absolute Hail Mary for America, which, following the change, saw a drastic improvement in the value of their dollar, as well as economic stability and growth. Everyone wanted a piece of that sweet US dollar, and America was in charge of it. The complexities of how this worked was too much for a 10-minute video, but just know that America became very, very wealthy with this new system. Fast forward to 1971, and America also decided to stop backing their currency by gold. 5 years later, the government would go as far as to change the very definition of a dollar, removing all reference to gold from not only the dictionary, but also its statutes. And in what might seem like an overnight change on the grand scale of history, the world moved into an era defined by a flat monetary system. But little did America know, this would mark the beginning of the end for their dominating grip on global trade. Following the shift to the flat system, which in simple terms means a currency that isn't backed by any tangible asset, America still saw a large amount of economic growth. Although almost every country had dropped the gold standard, their currencies were all still backed by the US dollar. It was seen as the most stable reserve, which is why many countries used it in global trade. That was, of course, until now. The first drastic move away from the US dollar in global trade came in March 2023. When Saudi Arabia's finance minister announced that their country would start conducting trade in currencies that weren't the US dollar. Why did Saudi Arabia do this? Well, One word.
China.
You see, China has become Saudi Arabia's largest trading partner with a significant share in the nation's oil exports. This relationship has been growing for a while now, but it was largely bolstered by China's Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to connect the world via modern-day Silk Road, encompassing various lands and maritime trade routes. Alongside that, a recent deal was made resulting in Saudi Aramco acquiring a 10% stake in the Chinese oil refiner Rongsheng Petrochemical for $3.6 billion. You know, the type of money you find down the Saudi couch. The deal also included a long-term commitment by Saudi Aramco to supply 480,000 barrels of crude oil to Rongsheng over the next 20 years. Now, at first, China and Saudi Arabia discussed running the trades in the Chinese yuan as a move to get away from using the US dollar. China and America's relationship has always been rocky, but has gotten worse over the past few years, which makes sense as to why they would want to remove themselves from using their dollar, especially when many see America's use of the dollar as a form of weaponization. This move away from using the US dollar is now being called de-dollarization, and efforts to promote this movement are gaining momentum. In fact, around the same time that Saudi Arabia announced it would start accepting other currencies for crude oil transactions, organizations like BRICS and the ASEAN group, comprising over 21 countries across Asia, Africa and South America, also declared their intention to abandon the US dollar. Their rationale is rooted in concerns that US sanctions would have a negative impact on their economies, which has motivated them to bolster their local currencies. The ASEAN group was the first alliance to officially announce its decision to cease using the US dollar for cross-border transactions. The leaders of these nations signed a declaration committing to the promotion of their local currencies as alternatives to the US dollar. Additionally, the BRICS alliance reached a similar decision during their summit in August, discontinuing the use of the US dollar for settling international trade. Instead, they will employ local currencies for trade and are exploring the feasibility of establishing a common currency among the member nations. Trade settlements will be confined to the existing bloc of 10 countries, excluding transactions involving nations outside the alliance. And so, whether it be through Saudi Arabia's acceptance of multiple currencies and India's purchase of crude oil with the rupee, or the BRICS and ASEAN groups committed to ditching the US dollar, one thing is for certain. The world is about to undergo a drastic change. And the ones who will feel it the most will be the United States, as their dollar begins to plummet and their country falls into a pit of depression. Whether you like it or not, the adoption of alternative currencies for trade presents a clear and immediate challenge to the long-standing dominance of the US dollar. As more countries and alliances move away from relying on the US dollar, its demand will diminish, which, in turn, will lead to its decline in value and bring on a host of economic problems. First, a devalued US dollar can trigger domestic inflation as the cost of imported goods and commodities rises. This inflation can strain the purchasing power of American consumers, resulting in a decrease in their standard of living. To combat inflation and stabilize the currency, the Federal Reserve may find itself compelled to raise interest rates. Higher interest rates can discourage investment and borrowing, potentially slowing down economic growth and job creation. The United States holds an enormous national debt, which, as of September 2023, is $33 trillion. And guess what? A significant portion of that debt is in US dollars. A weakened dollar can increase the real cost of servicing this debt, putting further strain on the country's financial situation and potentially necessitating difficult budgetary choices. The reason for this is that if the USA owes money to a different country and their dollar is stronger, it will suddenly become harder to pay it off. To put this into context, assume $1 US is worth £1 British pound. $1 owed would equal £1 owed. Now, assume the pound increased value and is now worth $2 US. America would now need to work twice as hard to service the same amount of debt. Now, consider that with $33 trillion, and you can see the cards start to collapse. And so, one can't help but wonder what the USA will do considering this impending change. The dollar, up to now, has been its foundation, and when a house's foundation begins to weaken, everyone inside starts to leave. At this point in time, it's hard to predict exactly what will happen. But one thing is for sure, the dominance of the United States is about to come to an end. Who will take their place? Well, subscribe to the channel, as I'll be sure to keep you updated. Thanks for watching.